Forward to our next session of the day as we already have Emmy with us. Let me tell you a little bit about Emmy. She's a board director and award-winning author. She's author of the Change Makers Playbook, which is about how to seek, seed, and scale innovation in any company. This book has been winner of the Book Excellence Best Business Book Award 2020, and we would like to hear more from Emmy around uncertainty and lessons for innovators. Over to you, Emmy. The microphone and audience is all yours.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody who's joining the Global Leadership Summit. I'm here to talk about lessons for innovators thriving through uncertainties. And before I dive into the substance of my recommendations and thoughts, I thought I'd give you a little bit of a background on me and how is it that I'm sitting here in my dining room in New Jersey on a Sunday morning under a couple of feet of snow outside, speaking to a group of people who are largely very far away on the other side of the world. So just a little bit about me. I grew up in Brooklyn, and for those of you who know the New York area, Brooklyn's become the cool part of New York. I lived there and grew up when it was completely uncool. In fact, when I was in college, people made fun of me for coming from Brooklyn because I had a funny accent. But it was kind of cool, and you'll see in a few minutes why I'm telling you about that, because it was an incredibly diverse place, and there were just so many different kinds of people cohabitating. The schools, the communities, the neighborhoods, and that became very, very important to what I ended up doing with my life commercially. So a couple of experiences really influenced who I became, and as I look back, for my philosophy of innovation. And one was that I was regularly drafted by my dad, who is Harold. That's our family. That was our family business, along with my 4 siblings, to work in the family business. We did everything. Since we weren't members of the union, my dad could prevail upon us to do whatever he couldn't ask his unionized employees to do, unpacking inventory, stocking shelves, cleaning the store, whatever had to be done. But the best part was being stationed behind the counter, which is kind of right opposite the front door. You never knew who was going to come through the door, and you had around 10 seconds to get ready for the possibility that they were coming straight for you. His clientele were very diverse. He served everybody from blue-collar immigrants, mostly from Italy, who lived kind of in that direction from the store, to an extremely wealthy enclave of transplants from the Middle East who self-isolated in a neighborhood about half a mile away in that direction and came to his store because they trusted him. So what was so formative about that experience is that it put me into situations where I had to work with, collaborate with, serve, and build relationships with all different kinds of people. People who had very different life experiences from mine, very different hopes and dreams. And so for me, appreciating diverse perspectives and building relationships and collaborating with people who were not at all like me wasn't an academic concept. It wasn't a concept being promoted by the human resource department. It was what life was about. And so that's this ability to appreciate and collaborate with people who have diverse perspectives is a really key element of answering the question, how can we thrive now? So we'll talk more about that as we go through this. So fast forward to now, I spent most of my career was in the corporate world. I worked for companies like American Express, Citigroup, AXA. But about 7 years, I decided to leave that life and start over. And I wrote this book, The Changemakers Playbook, and not only because I didn't know what to do with myself after a long run in the corporate world where things are very laid out and structured for you, but I have a friend, Kevin, and he put a bee in my bonnet about writing a book when I met him in 2010. So when I finally made this break back in 2014, and I didn't know quite what to do with myself. I started talking to friends of mine who'd written books and said, maybe that's what I should do. And the single piece of advice that got me to say yes was when a former colleague said to me, Amy, write a book if you really think you have something to say. And at that point, I really knew I was in. By the way, he also said, forget about making money from a book, which also turned out to be true. But I really am glad that I did it, because what I decided I wanted to say is that innovation is not about cool stuff. It's not about technology, although technology can certainly be an enabler, and oftentimes it's a critical enabler. But that innovation is really about developing and scaling viable solutions to the real problems that real people have. And certainly following our last speaker's talk, we're all reminded there are an abundance of problems that we could all go about solving. So I think we all play a role in today's world as innovators. The question is, how do we play that role? So I think about innovation as, it can be new to a company, new to a geography, new to a sector, new to a segment. It can be incremental, which does not mean it's trivial or unimportant, or it can be obviously highly disruptive. It's got to be viable, stuff that can be done, can be executed, that's got a viable and sustainable business model. But really, most importantly, solving the real problems, so both emotional and rational, of real people. So innovations that serve a real purpose are driven by an understanding of what people's needs are. The thing is, innovators always face curveballs. I think it's the nature of change. This past year, we've certainly all seen the mother of all curveballs with the pandemic and all of the crises that have happened around it. So the question is, how do we innovate now in the face of all the craziness of the past year and all of the change that is yet to come? 'Cause certainly we're not done. So I came across this study that McKinsey published a couple of months ago, indicating that certainly executives see the changing reality. They see that it's the challenge of their careers, and also acknowledge, unfortunately, that they're not well prepared to respond. What was really concerning about the data that was published in their study is the decline in investment and the decline in priority being placed on innovation. So, as you can imagine, when business gets tough, what do people do? They focus on efficiency. There's been obviously a huge need to focus on organizational health. I hear that from everybody I talk to, and it's critical. We're all facing huge challenges. But I'm kind of concerned about the apparent, reduction in priority placed on innovation, because if you think about the definition that I like to live by, we've been dealt a hand that seems to suggest that our effectiveness as innovators and the ability to drive viable new solutions to the real problems of real people, the need to do that has certainly not been greater in my lifetime. So the question becomes, how can innovation and innovators thrive under today's conditions? Now, I'm assuming you're all here at this session because you want to be a better innovator, you want to be a change maker, and you're also looking for answers. So I'm going to share some of the answers to this question, focused mainly on what each of us can do as individuals. You'll see that the answers are not mysterious. They won't be surprising. In fact, they may seem kind of obvious, but they all require leadership. And I have to say, I'm so inspired by the last speaker's talks. I'd say the closer you are to being an emergent leader, the better you'll be able to solve the challenges of innovation and really make a difference. They also require hard work and real sensitivity to other people. Your customers, your employees, any of the stakeholders in your community or the bigger ecosystem where you're trying to solve problems, and knowing how you each personally contribute and where your passion lies. At the end of the day, it's always someplace between funny and concerning to me that the lessons are hiding in plain sight. That in my career, and I spent the better part of the last 20 years really focused on this whole issue of how do you get an idea or a concept or an insight to be to operate at scale, be viable, be real in the market. And what I continue to see is that even the best insights and concepts and ideas that could be innovations get derailed or diminished, not because there's a lack of ideas, not because there's a lack of technology, and not even because there's a lack of capital. There's sometimes too much money sloshing around, but because we very often fail to seek and learn from others. So often, as I said, the lessons are hiding in plain sight. Now, I would argue that we don't have the luxury of missing these lessons now. We've got a lot to do on this innovation journey. And I think back to my very first innovation mentor. It's a guy named Larry Keeley, and Larry now heads the innovation practice for Deloitte globally. He used to say to me, look for great ideas specifically by going to sources not related to your sector. So often when we're looking for solutions, we go we stay within our domain. And he taught me that it's really important to get out of your box. That was one of the best ways to find fresh ideas and to avoid just being too me too. And then I had the privilege during the end of my tenure at Citi to report directly to Ajay Banga, who I'm sure many of you know. He's legendary in your part of the world, just about to step up to the chairmanship of MasterCard. And Ajay used to tell all of his direct reports to steal shamelessly. And I know he meant, of course, morally and ethically, but to seek insights and ideas and answers every place. And I carry the things that people like Larry and Ajay have taught me throughout my career. And what I've learned from them really leads to my motivation for being here today and wanting to spend time with this particular audience. I've gained a lot of expertise. Some people call it now wisdom, which is a really nice and diplomatic way of saying that I'm probably older than a lot of people in this audience, but that's okay. But I know how hard the work of an innovator is, and having been an innovation operator, I've got the real dirt under my nails, and also the stars and scars, as one of my colleagues would say, are what you really have to do to make something happen. And I'm really passionate about it. So I've really seen my purpose at this stage of my career as, being able to share my expertise with other people like you who really are serious about this and want to make things happen. And so that leads me to kind of the big five. And I'm going to talk about each of these over the next half hour or so. And hopefully you'll take away some lessons and ideas and tactics and tips that you can use. So the first one is to be guided by shared purpose. Now, purpose has become a really hot topic in the business world these days. And I worry sometimes that it'll just become another buzzword. You see a lot of companies talking about how they're now focused on purpose. It's been a big focus at the Business Roundtable. BlackRock CEO Larry Fink has spoken out about his firm's commitment to investing in purpose-driven brands. And by the way, I think he's very serious about it. He's been talking about this for years, and their actions are lining up with his words. But for some companies, it's just a PR action. It's a slogan on the wall. Somebody heard that they had to have a purpose statement or they wouldn't be able to attract millennial and Gen Z employment. So they come up with something. And that's not at all what I mean. When I say be guided by a sense of shared purpose, the question you have to ask yourselves and your colleagues is, do you know why your business or company or organization where you might want to work exists? Why is that entity here on Earth? Why should it matter to stakeholders? What's the real problem you're trying to solve? And is everyone in the organization fighting the same fight? So why is this so important to being able to thrive as an innovator in today's world? Well, because purpose provides a North Star. It's what will give you focus. It's so practical. It allows you to prioritize. In a truly purpose-led business, decision making is guided by alignment with the purpose. It's not just a slogan. It means that everybody is working towards a common horizon line, and everybody is heading in the same direction. So I can't imagine a more practical tool. And you'll see even in the data today that purpose-driven innovations, startups that are purpose-driven have a higher track record of success. So these are some of my favorite purpose-driven brands. There's a US bend to these, sorry, since that's where I am, but many of these brands are global, so you may be familiar with them. And the reason I share these is that these are all examples of companies for whom purpose is really a North Star that drives the company's actions deep down into the companies. They sound like good slogans, but they also really drive behavior and decisions. You'll see the other thing they have in common is they're all a bit aspirational, or some of them very aspirational. Um, they all go beyond just products and features, and they all reflect the values of the brands or the companies within which those brands reside. The second recommendation that I have is that innovations, and this has always been the case, but now more than ever, if you really want to mobilize and get anything done, have to meet real market needs. And it constantly amazes me, whether I'm at a pitch day with startups or I'm working with a corporate team, how often the ideas that teams are pursuing are not well supported by customer insight, or they haven't been co-developed with potential users and buyers. I would say that in today's world, now more than ever, outside in expectations have to be understood, and they will guide how innovations that end up succeeding will succeed or fail. So, especially in today's world, once your stakeholders know what is possible digitally, their expectations change. And I think that's why in the last year, you've seen so much focus on digital acceleration because excuse me, um, companies no longer had a choice. Customer demand became so intense. And with the pandemic, they really didn't have a choice anymore. But how do you make sure that you really understand the needs of your market? It seems so obvious, but again, you've got to listen to your customers. So I came across a study that was done about a year or so ago, indicating, and it was a study of about 400 CEOs globally, talking to them about how they spent their time. And it turned out that they were spending on average only 3% of their time with customers. So, I mean, I just find that statistic to be almost tragic, especially since you can imagine that most of those CEOs are probably running around telling their organizations that they have to put the customer at the center of everything they do. So, how can you possibly do that if you're not talking to your customers? And it doesn't take a big budget. I mean, I came from a corporate world where someone said, listen to your customers, we'd say, okay, $200,000 for a market research study, and then we'll go and listen. It's like, no, 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 no. I literally mean go talk to your customers, talk to the people who use the products and services where you see innovation opportunity. It's what I've advised. So many people have asked me in the past year, what do I do? What do I do now that I'm stuck? I can't run my business the way I've been running it. The first thing I say is like, go out and listen to your customers. Have a conversation where the customer is doing 80 or 90% of the talking, and you are really listening. Your job is to be able to ask questions, to understand their emotional state. How are they feeling? What are they doing differently? What are the problems that they are struggling to solve? And then really peeling back that proverbial onion to understand, but really, really actively listening and trying to set aside your baggage, your knowledge, which can be incredible baggage when you're trying to really listen openly, to really try to understand what's new and what's different. The other thing I think is a great tool as you're doing that, as you're listening to customers. We tend to talk about our customers as this one kind of amalgamated mass. And if you really focus on how people make decisions and choices in their lives, whether they are in the business context, so B2B, or whether it's somebody in their personal life making a decision as a consumer, decisions usually have multiple stakeholders. So I think you can parse any decision um, that's made either in your family context or in a work context and really start to think about, well, how that choice ended up being made. And if you think about who the, who the decision makers were, the influencers, the users, and who actually was the buyer, who had the cash, you'll find that there's generally a constellation. I did a lot of work when I was at AXA. We talked to people who own life insurance policies about how they came to the decision on whatever policy they had. And what we discovered is that people in our target market, on average, consulted 10 different sources before they ever went to meet with an agent. Their business is very intermediated. And most of them had no professional credentials to sell insurance. They were people they trusted. It may have been a magazine article. They may have gone to Google. So there are complicated journeys that people go down. And you really have to understand all of those players as you're deciding, is the concept that I have really viable? And this understanding of users and buyers and influencers ends up having a big impact on companies' abilities to go to market successfully. So I'm going through this issue now, working with a client on a new product launch and trying to get them to stop product pushing and start thinking about how the person they're pitching has to go and get agreement from other people inside the organization. It's a B2B technology product, and to design the experience so they make it incredibly easy for the person to get agreement, because in the end, the decision may have nothing to do with product feature and functionality and everything to do with understanding how decision gets made. And that by itself is a big innovation opportunity, I think, for a lot of us. My third recommendation is to think about how you can be more resourceful. And I tell a story about resourcefulness in the Changemakers Playbook. That's still my favorite story. A few years ago, I met a guy named Drew Lakatos, and Drew's a co-founder of a medical device startup called Active Protective. And their first device is sort of an inflatable belt, almost like an airbag, an inflatable belt that a senior citizen could wear very discreetly and comfortably, that would open up immediately when it detected that the person was at risk of falling. And so it would cushion that fall. And seniors falling is a major cause of death. I'm sure globally, definitely in the United States, and just complete disability. I mean, it is ruinous if a senior citizen, even if they survive, it is really ruinous. So Drew really wanted to solve this problem, and the standards for getting approval from the regulators for medical device are really hard. The standards even for getting a buy-in from a partner to want to work with you on prototyping and testing the device is really hard. And Drew has 4 kids and a wife. He's not a kid in a garage. He really needed to be very resourceful. He passionately believed in this idea. And so what he ended up doing to develop his first prototype was he went to an auto parts junkyard on a Saturday morning and ended up cutting out airbags that were still in good condition from cars that were in this junkyard, took them to his tailor with bicycle inner tubes, and was able to construct a crude working prototype of what he was talking about with his concept that enabled him to get his first partnership with a hospital and seed funding to begin to validate his concept. And this is a product that's on the market today and having success. So I say to people always, figure out where your junkyard is. And certainly meeting Drew and hearing his story forced me to completely reframe my notion of like, what kind of resources do you really need? And how can you be really creative about thinking about taking those first steps forward so you can build credibility and buy-in for your idea. The other thing I think that we all have to do, especially in today's world, is to figure out where you should upgrade your capabilities and your own skills and broaden your network as another means of expanding your skills. So there's this saying I love, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And the tools that may have worked for all of us in a prior world just may not be terribly constructive right now. So stop pounding that hammer if you're not looking at nails. Know when you're not looking at nails and find ways that work for you to expand your tool set. And I don't think it's just incumbent upon you to learn everything. I mean, I'm certainly not learning a whole new bag of tricks at this stage of life. I do it. I expand my tool set by constantly expanding my network. That's a key tactic. It's not the only tactic I use, but it's a key one. So that leads me to recommendation 4 on the importance of sustaining a diverse and inclusive culture. So the fact is, everybody can play a role in innovation. And I tell people that my focus is innovation. There are some people who will back away and say, "Well, I'm not creative. I can't play a role." And the fact is, everyone has something to bring to the table because for innovations to succeed, they require incredible, even unanticipated diversity of skills and perspectives because you're solving really hard problems if you're really doing something new. And hard problem solving requires fresh thinking. So you've got to have diversity of thought and know how to unleash it. Um, I think certainly in the organizations where I've spent a lot of my career, a lot of effort made on representation. We need this kind of person and that kind of person. And I think that's fine and certainly making progress on gender representation, on um, racial and ethnic uh, representation. That that's great on age diversity, really important issue. But I think that's an interesting starting point. I think a lot of leaders are not comfortable amplifying difference. And it might be uncomfortable because embedded in difference is sometimes conflict. So if you're going to bring together a diverse group of people who really are going to offer diverse perspectives and diverse points of view and see different ways to solve problems, you've also got to be really comfortable amplifying difference and allowing conflict in a way that's highly constructive and leads the group together towards a solution. And that goes back to my first point about purpose. If people are working towards a common purpose, a common North Star, it's much easier to channel that conflict towards getting to the end game because people may disagree on tactics or particular aspects of the solution, but in the end, they all want the same thing to happen. So it really enables you to do that. The other thing that's really important is to enabling that environment is to care for your team and to care for your network. So I think we've all seen over the past year how much caring for the people around us matters, whether they're our employees or family members, our friends. I mean, I don't know anyone who hasn't been in harm's way of the virus. And people are dealing with all kinds of unforeseen issues, either their own medical issues or those of their families, loss of loved ones, childcare issues, elder care issues, financial issues that people are facing. So my advice is make sure that you're caring for your broader network, not just your team and the immediate people in your life. Um, if you care for them in a way that's really authentic, you really mean it, they will be there for you when you need help, when you need a referral, when you need advice, when you need resources, when you need ideas. It's the right thing to do, and it'll come back to you in rich and rewarding ways. I'd say for me, I've been working independently since 2014. I don't have a team. All of my resources are ones that I generate. It's my network. that's a constant source of almost endless abundance that helps to fuel my ideas and my work and the kinds of opportunities that I get to engage in. Secondly, a couple of years ago, Google did a study of 180 teams and they identified 5 characteristics that were shared by the best teams, so teams that were most effective in accomplishing their goals. And you may have seen this list before, it's been out a lot, but it's so true. I love reminding people about it, but creating an environment of psychological safety where people feel safe taking risks. That relates to the comment I just made about an environment where people can say what they mean and feel, and conflict is permitted in a way that feels safe and constructive. People feel they can be vulnerable, that they can survive failure. Innovation means you're going to fail some of the time, maybe a lot of the time. If you're not failing at least some of the time, then you have to ask yourself if you're really innovating. Dependability, everybody around you can be counted on. The work that's getting done is dependable. There's clarity around goals and roles. Sure, there's a lot of ambiguity. I think innovation by definition is full of ambiguity, uncertainty, unpredictability, but there's a structure to how work is getting done, and people aren't debating who does what. People have meaning in their work. There's personal significance. They think what they're doing matters, and it matters well beyond a paycheck. It aligns to their values. And finally, impact. The work has purpose and it affects the greater good. So people feel that their efforts can make a difference. So I think this is a great list to keep in mind, really, no matter what you're doing, not just innovating, but how do you create an environment where change can happen and where teams with a group of people working together on change feel they can be successful. This is a fantastic list, and I come back to it often with the teams that I work with. Finally, when we think about innovation, we all like to focus on the upside and all the wonderful things that are going to happen. And I've seen certainly, I've been to hundreds of founder pitch sessions because I do some angel investing on the side. And I've certainly been to my share of corporate pitches trying to convince the CFO to sign a big check to let us do something new. And we all like to talk about all the wonderful things that are happening. But I'm a little bit of a hobbyist in the field of behavioral economics. And if you're familiar with that field, you'll know that people really, we all as humans tend to overweight the downside of anything that we're looking at. And so I think it's really important to be upfront about the risks of innovation as a way of starting to mitigate those risks and reassuring whoever you're trying to convince that you've got it under control. And I know I was talking to a founder a few years ago. He said, well, if I did that with investors, they'd never give me my money. It's almost like you can't admit that there are risks. But I think you've got to start to recognize them. I think anticipating and staying a couple of steps ahead of what might unexpectedly happen. What am I going to do when things don't go according to plan? Because things never go according to plan when you're innovating. Taking a fail fast, fail cheap approach is a great way to mitigate risk. And doing the things that I've said already. If you're listening to your customers and understand how they make decisions, understand their emotional needs and their rational needs, understand the problems that they're struggling with. So the more human-centered you are on whatever it is you're pursuing, the more likely it is that you will be able to succeed, that you are working on something that can work. And the more you are building a diverse team and have them focused on a purpose, all of those things coming together, all of the things that I'm talking about here are risk mitigants. So, but there are a couple of other things you can do. So if we've learned anything over the past year, it's that we can do things differently. it's amazing. I see every day how I've made changes in my own life and the businesses in my community have changed the way they're operating so that they could stay in business and stay in pace with the market, and how big companies are responding. So it's been great to watch in the greater community and world, and also just with my own clients, some of the transformations that have taken place. We all, fall victim to getting wedded to how things have always been done, and it's hard to shake that stuff. So I suggest that as leaders and as innovators, you can probably all benefit from weighting more of your efforts to innovating how you're doing things, not just what you're doing. As innovators, we focus on the idea, the concept, the thing that we want to bring to market, the thing that we want to change. So we focus a lot on the what. I challenge you to think a lot about the how as well, because the how is what could really make the difference between success and failure. Part of that is really understanding the customer behaviors that are driving whatever business model it is you're creating. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the business model canvas. It's a fantastic tool. There's a reason why it's so deeply embedded around the world. Um, what you want to do, and I spoke a little bit about this earlier when I talked about users and buyers, is really unpack the key behaviors that are driving the business model that you anticipate, not just how you think you're going to earn revenue, but what are the key behaviors that are going to drive your operations, that are going to drive your talent requirements, that are going to drive your resource requirements, that are going to drive the channels that you need to be in. So to really understand those customer behaviors, requires a great deal of collaboration. And back to what I said before, listening to your customers. So I think, and I would say, thinking back to the work that I did at Citi, where I had the privilege to lead the team that drove the digital transformation of the US credit card business about 15 years ago. And that was in its day a $5 billion business, a massively complicated business where, let me tell you, people were, my colleagues were afraid of change. Um, we built our entire model that drove the transformation around starting by saying, okay, what are the key customer behaviors that drive this business? And then building a very, very efficient testing and experimentation engine that helped us understand, if we innovate this about the customer experience, in our case, using digital tools and technologies, what will happen to the business model, and how does that affect not just our financials, but how the entire place operates. So it's a very important mindset to take on. And again, it's a big piece of the how. And I would say the way we approached that particular how was absolutely a critical driver of how we managed to transform a very complicated and very risk-averse business. Seemingly small elements can make a big difference. So that's where it becomes important to not let everything that you know and did in the past become baggage that blocks your ability to see the future. Little tiny things. We found little tiny things in the customer experience could have outsized impacts. Responding to an emotional need could have a major financial impact, which is not traditionally how bankers think about things. So I also say, back to the advice that Ajay Banga and Larry Keeley gave me so long ago, is we've all got to look for answers in non-obvious places. And one of the things I love to talk about is how much startups and big companies can learn from each other. So, we all know that startups like to believe that big companies are dinosaurs. Big companies like to believe that startups just get away with murder. They don't have any accountability for anything and held to low standards. And look, there are definitely big legacy companies that are dinosaurs. I've seen them. And there are definitely startups that are not accountable for achieving profitability. They operate, if you're your investors may not have that as a goal. If they want an exit and they can get there without profitability, they may not care. So I get it. But there are a lot of connections between their different challenges, and there are really things that corporate and startup leaders can learn from each other. So I love looking in opposite places for knowledge. So I would say there's a lot of opportunity to listen to people who you think have nothing to share with you. You would be very surprised. And I think particularly this startup corporate contrast is a very productive place to start. Finally, I think it's really important to not sit on the sidelines and expect things to work out. I'm very concerned, going back to the McKinsey data that I presented, that apparently there are, a good quorum of leaders who think that they can focus on efficiency, not worry about innovation now, and come back to that later. I think that's a failed strategy. I think we've all, if you've got something that you want to do and you see an innovation opportunity, it's really important to find ways to engage, to iterate, to experiment, to avoid writing PowerPoints. I think PowerPoints can be the death of innovation. My apologies for using slides here. Go out and try things, ask for advice, build the culture, the team that you're working, and build and tap in to your network. So our last speaker talked about, fearlessness, and I think I'm definitely going to rethink this slide as I go forward and talk about this topic again. But I think the reality is we're living in a really difficult world. There's no lack of opportunity to innovate. The challenges have never been greater. You just turn on the news and it's, look, what's happening in the United States now in Texas is terrifying and tragic and clearly begs for a rethink of how that state operates its power grid. It's incredible. I think that a lot of people get scarred by their own tough luck or events around them or what other people tell them they should be doing. And there is a lot of fear-based decision making going on. I saw it coming out of the financial crisis. I was laid off from 2 jobs in a row coming out of the financial crisis and had to really fight my own fear. We were paying college tuition for 2 children at that point, which in the US is quite a big ticket. So I think you see so many examples now of people stepping up and refusing to be defeated by the fear. And I think fear is the biggest derailer of innovation. I was a literature major in college, and so I love understanding the origin of words. And the word courage comes from the Latin root for core and the old French word courage, and which it means heart, of course, for those of you who may have studied Latin. And I think innovation takes the courage of head and heart. It's, it takes mental strength and it takes moral strength. It's also very emotional. So I think that throwing a wide and non-obvious net for support can be a big help to maintaining that strength, to building your courage, and to building your sense of fearlessness so that you can improve your effectiveness as an innovator and hopefully take advantage of some of my recommendations. So I'm sure that the organizers will make my slides available if you want them, but you can certainly reach out to me, or I've got some free downloads on my website. You can follow me on LinkedIn, and hopefully at some point, maybe our paths will cross in the real world. But it's been really a pleasure and a privilege to be part of this agenda and conference and speak to this group. So thank you. You want to turn to questions?
Yep. So thank you, Amy, for a wonderful, wonderful session. I really loved your slides, the pictorial slides, because I'm a big fan of those kind of presentations because they.
It's the creative in me. I discovered late in life, having worked in banking, you kind of tamp down that creativity. It's not always something that's valued. And now that I'm kind of liberated from the corporate structure, I enjoy bringing out that side of me. So thank you.
Yeah. I mean, it keeps your adrenaline going, and you remember that for a long time.
Well, yeah, well,
I'm trying.
that's another interesting point that to think about when you're building your teams and thinking about innovation. We all learn differently. And some people are visual learners and some people are oral learners. And so, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So we have about 9 minutes left, and we can take, I guess, 3 to 4 questions here. The first question is by Lokesh Kata. Lokesh asks, "Ma'am, innovation in marketplace is valued when it disrupts the market and creates new emerging markets in a startup setup. Do you see corporates investing in innovation that can disrupt their existing revenue models?
Existing models
Revenue generation, I guess. Yeah.
for revenue.
Rev-
Um, yeah, and it's interesting. When I was, I sort of fell into this whole field of working on innovation because my CEO at Citi, I was hired at Citi to lead the digital transformation in the credit card business, which was by itself, a big innovation agenda. But one day my CEO, in my update with him, he said to me, "Well, Amy, I want you to make us more innovative because we're more innovative. We're not in. We need to be innovative, and we're not innovative. And if you're in the corporate world and you're rational, and your boss asks you to do something, you listen to him." And I went out of his office scratching my head and thinking, "Well, does he think I'm really smart, or did I just draw like the absolute short straw?" And he used to. It literally changed my life. Certainly changed my career. Um, but he always used to tell everybody, "Well, Amy's working on disruptive innovation." And one day I looked up disruptive in the dictionary, being a lover of language. And, disrupt means to destroy what's there. And I used to say, like, "Steve, will you stop saying that? Like, people here are going to kill me. Nobody, my colleagues do not want me to disrupt them." And the other reason I encouraged him to stop saying that, and by the way, he never stopped saying it, he thought it was very funny, is that I don't think you really know when you start where you're going to end up. So I think starting out saying, "I'm going to disrupt whatever," I think you just have to take it a step at a time. And if you keep listening to the market, and if you're quick to follow opportunities and take risks, and you're a good sensor, yeah, you could end up disrupting. I love, you think about Jeff Bezos when he had the idea to sell books online, which is where Amazon started. They were just an online bookseller. That was, first of all, people thought he was crazy and said he'd never make any money. But I don't think even Jeff would say at that point that he could have predicted where Amazon would have been. So I would say, yeah, I think there are plenty of people getting out of the bed in the morning, say they're going to disrupt this or that. And I'm like, okay, whatever. I want to understand, what customer insights are you pursuing? And how are you demonstrating that you're developing a scalable business model that is going to differentiate and attract a lot of, allow you to build a committed franchise. So I may not have
Absolutely.
directly answered your question, but hopefully that's helpful.
No, absolutely. Our second question is by Manjunath. He asks, in tech industry, innovation groups are generally closed for fellow engineers, architects, core groups, etc. Very rarely others are made aware, let alone participate. How do you inspire the change of having more engineers to contribute to the solution making?
I know, and that kind of thing drives me crazy. And I think it gets back to, the leaders of these efforts have to value inclusion. It's funny, when I would work for E-Trade Financial for about a year and a half, also as a head of innovation, and I was started to hold. We had a particular ambition for the company that we wanted to build concepts around to innovate the business, and I held brainstorming sessions where we invited the engineers, and they were shocked because they had never been included in these sessions. And I'm like, you have to have everybody at the table. And I'd say, that was very key at E-Trade. At Citi, what we did, a really important part of our process was we would invite people from across all the business functions and product areas. And my only filter was I wanted to invite people who I thought were really interested, people who were positive, people who were constructive. So I used to keep a list of people I called the hand raisers. So people who would reach out to me or people who would talk to me in the elevator, you know, so it was just my way. And I can't, so I think certainly if you're in an organization where the engineers aren't included, try to invite yourself, make a non-threatening suggestion, show examples of how truly innovative companies have broadly inclusive, diverse teams, and that's key to their success, kind of case studies. But I'd say try to get invited to the table.
Absolutely.
Sometimes you have to invite yourself. Don't wait to be asked. Sometimes you have to
lead.
Assert yourself, raise your hand.
That's true. Be bold. Yeah. Lokesh has our last question. We still have about 3 minutes left. For a leader, what's important? Is to create or enable workplace where innovation is culturally intrinsic to the DNA, or is it to focus on new outcomes that can create new successes?
Whew. I would say that certainly in my own experience and what I've seen works, I mean, you've got to get the right people. You have to set a vision for what, have an understanding of the goals that you want to accomplish. So at least, you need an understanding of what do I think I want to accomplish? And that'll probably change, you're going to refine that, but you need a starting framework because that will define what your talent and other resource requirements are. And then you can start to assemble the team. I would be very careful. We tend to be attracted to people for their functional or technical skill, but I think the soft skills actually become the harder skills. The skills of leadership that our last speaker talked about are critical. People who are collaborative, who listen, are open-minded, who have positive energy, who want to work, who believe in the value of working for a shared purpose. So I think you start with a set of, okay, where do I think I'm going? Okay, in that case, who do I need? Functional and leadership. And then say a big part of your responsibility, especially if you're an existing organization, is creating the right environment, challenging the existing processes, because what works for running a legacy business will kill innovation. You think about metrics, you think about bureaucratic processes. So for me, once I address that first set of issues, certainly in the roles that I've held, a lot of my time on governance, on processes, on policies, on removing obstacles, on creating an environment where the people in the group could do their best work and stay focused on our purpose. It's a big
Absolutely.
job. I like complicated. I like doing complicated stuff. So I think that's why I enjoyed those roles a lot.
Well, Amy, thank you for sharing your insights about innovating with anecdotes and experiences, your big five, and your ideas about using Lean Canvas and many other concepts was very pictorial, shall we say. So with that, we come to the end of this session and we have 10 minutes break. Over to you, Nupur.
Okay, I just want to say thanks again for having me, and good luck to everybody with their innovations. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ravi, and thank you, Emmy, for this amazing session. We really enjoyed it. I'm sure participants also enjoyed it a lot.